In today's world, we all know that NASA is way ahead of ISRO. However, if you look at the budget of both the space agencies, then it won't be wrong to say that India's space agency is miles behind NASA. But despite this, ISRO has done some amazing things in the past and will continue to do so in the future. But the question is, will ISRO ever beat NASA? Well, we don't know about beating NASA, but there are high chances that ISRO will leave NASA behind in the next decade. And that is because of 4 reasons. Reason number 1, reusable launch vehicle. Just like SpaceX, ISRO is also developing its own reusable launch vehicle called RLV, which is expected to be ready by 2024. Once this happens, ISRO will become one of the few space agencies to have an RLV, and not only that, it will also reduce the cost of space travel significantly. As for now, a launch from the GSLV costs around $65 million. But once RLV comes into picture, the cost is expected to come down to just $2 million. That is a huge difference. And for a country like India, which aims to launch 300 satellites by 2030, this will be a game changer. And not just for India, other countries like Japan and Europe are also focusing on reusability. For example, Japan has already successfully tested its own reusable launch vehicle. But Europe is struggling. This is because Europe does not have a single space agency. It has 22 of them, which makes coordination very difficult. Reason number 2, SSLV, Small Satellite Launch Vehicle. If you've been following our channel, then you already know that India recently launched its new SSLV, Small Satellite Launch Vehicle, which was developed to place small satellites into low Earth orbit, and it successfully placed all of its 4 satellites into orbit. Now, this is a big deal because India now has the capability to launch multiple small satellites at a time. Not only that, SSLV can also launch satellites on demand, which means that India can even launch satellites for commercial purposes. Reason number 3, Gaganyaan, India's first human spaceflight. One of the most important milestones for any space agency is when it launches its first astronaut into space. And ISRO is on the verge of achieving that with its Gaganyaan project. Now, according to ISRO, they will launch the uncrewed version of the spacecraft in 2024 and the crewed version in 2025. Now, even though this is quite ambitious, considering that Russia's Soyuz spacecraft took more than 5 years to be ready, ISRO might actually pull it off. And once they do, it will be a matter of time before India launches more astronauts into space. Reason number 4, Chandrayaan-3, which is going to take India to the moon. Yes, you heard that right. Chandrayaan-3 is India's 3rd lunar exploration mission after Chandrayaan-1 and Chandrayaan-2, and it is scheduled to launch in June or July 2023. Now, unlike Chandrayaan-2, Chandrayaan-3 will definitely succeed because ISRO has already made the necessary changes to the lander design based on the mistakes that were made during Chandrayaan-2. And this time, ISRO will use a different rocket for the mission, the Large Launch Vehicle Mark III. This is because the Mark III is more powerful and it can lift heavier payloads, which means that the lander will be more capable. So if everything goes well, then Chandrayaan-3 will successfully land on the moon, making India the 4th country to do so after the United States, Soviet Union, and China. So these are the 4 reasons why ISRO will leave NASA behind in the next decade. But you know what? There is one more reason why ISRO is far more capable than NASA, and that is because of the people who work there. If you look at the history of ISRO, then you will realize that most of the major projects were completed because of the sheer hard work and dedication of the scientists and engineers of ISRO. For example, when the PSLV was failing to place the satellites in the correct orbit, it was Dr. K. Radhakrishnan, the chairman of ISRO, who took it upon himself to find out the problem. He spent sleepless nights with his team to understand what went wrong and how it could be fixed. And eventually, they did fix it. The same happened with the GSLV. When it failed to perform, a team of 100 engineers and scientists worked day and night to figure out what went wrong. And eventually, they did. And this is the kind of passion and dedication that you will not see anywhere else, not even at NASA. At NASA, most of the people just show up to work, do their job, and go home. But here in India, people live their job. They breathe their job. Take the example of APJ Abdul Kalam. He dedicated his entire life to the betterment of ISRO. The same can be said about Vikram Sarabhai, the father of India's space program. These people did not work for money or fame. They worked because they loved what they were doing. And this is the kind of passion that is required to make great things happen. Now, this is not to say that NASA does not have passionate people. They definitely do. But the fact is that the majority of people working at NASA are just doing their job. Whereas in India, most of the people working at ISRO are doing more than their job. They are going above and beyond to achieve great things. And this is the kind of attitude that will take India to the top. However, if India wants to beat NASA, then it must invest more in ISRO. Right now, ISRO's budget is only $1.8 billion, which is peanuts compared to NASA's budget of $23.3 billion. To put things into perspective, NASA's budget is more than 12 times that of ISRO. Now, this is not to say that ISRO is not doing a good job with such a small budget, but the fact is that if ISRO had the same budget as NASA, then it would have done even better things. Right now, ISRO is building some amazing rockets like the S-200, which will be the most powerful rocket in the world. But if India invested more in ISRO, then the S-200 would have been ready by now. Not only that, India could have also developed more advanced rockets like the S-300, which will be used to launch the first Indian astronauts to Mars. The point is that if India really wants to beat NASA, then it must invest more in ISRO. Currently, ISRO's budget is only 1% of the total central government budget, which is peanuts. Other countries like the USA and China spend more than 10 times that on their space programs, and the results speak for themselves. The U.S. is the undisputed leader in space exploration. It has launched more than 6,000 satellites into space and has sent humans to the moon 6 times. China, on the other hand, has become the third country to send humans into space and has built the largest space station in the world. If India wants to beat NASA, then it must invest more in ISRO. But the question is, where will this money come from? Well, the answer to that lies in privatization. Currently, the Indian government owns 100% stake in ISRO. But if the government privatizes some of its shares, then it can raise a lot of money, which can then be invested back into ISRO to help it grow. For example, if the government privatizes 20% stake in ISRO, then it can raise more than $10 billion, which will be more than enough to develop more advanced rockets and satellites. In fact, this is already happening to some extent. In 2016, the Indian government allowed private companies to launch satellites. Since then, several Indian startups have been launched, including Skyroot, which recently became India's first private space company to launch a rocket. So privatization is definitely the way forward, and if India does it correctly, then it can easily become the global leader in space exploration. But you know what? Even if India does all the things that we have discussed, there is still no guarantee that it will be able to beat NASA. That is because at the end of the day, space exploration is a numbers game. It is all about who has the most money, who has the best technology, and who has the most skilled workforce. And right now, NASA is way ahead in all 3 of these departments. For example, NASA has more than 17,000 employees, whereas ISRO only has 1,700. Not only that, NASA also has a much larger budget and much better technology. This is why it is very difficult to say whether India will be able to beat NASA in the future. But one thing is for sure, India will continue to improve, and it will continue to push the boundaries of space exploration. And who knows, maybe one day it will leave NASA behind.